Right, so we are recording. Hi, my name is Rohan Alexander, and today's topic is very close to my heart. A CS professor once said something sensible. He said, and they're all he said that passion is just your mind's way of tricking you into doing hard things or boring things or things that might otherwise be slightly outside your comfort zone. And when I think back on my PhD, it was certainly the case that I floundered around until I decided what I wanted to just focus on the thing that I was interested in and let the chips sort of fall where they would. And I think that most of us have had the experience of having to get something done for work and you just sort of get it done, but it feels like it takes forever and you're really bored. And that's okay because like hopefully you get money. But there's another area where we really don't want people to feel that they're just grinding and not getting anywhere or to give up too early. And that's when they're learning. And the thing about learning is that you're going to suck. You're going to be really bad at it for whatever you're trying to learn. You're going to be really bad at it for a long time. My son's been trying to learn to walk and he just keeps falling over, right? And so any small little impediments, we want to try and smooth it over. And similarly, as teachers, we want to try and trick a learner's brain into putting a huge amount of effort. And that huge amount of effort is needed, but we want to trick them into doing that work so that they can learn something as difficult as programming in R. And our guest, Alex Cookson, who is the data scientist at Muse, which is a sleep tracking brainwave analyzing startup here in Toronto, believes that datasets have that power. So it is a real pleasure to welcome the Inquisitor of Information, the Field Marshal of Facts, the Duke of Data, Alex Cookson, on the power of great datasets. Welcome, Alex.
Wow, I cannot think of a better introduction, Rohan. Thank you so much. I'm honored to be here and particularly honored that there's so many folks when the weather, at least here in Toronto, is so beautiful. So for those that aren't here, it's about 18 degrees and sunny outside right now. So hopefully everyone's able to get out for a walk after this session. I'll share my screen and then we can get going. Okay, so there's a slightly different title. So today I'm going to be talking about great data sets, and it really is a love story. As Rohan mentioned, my name's Alex Cookson. There's a couple areas down there on Twitter and GitHub where you can find me. So let's get going. And just as a little bit of background, this is essentially the longer version of a lightning talk that I gave at RStudio Global back in January. So if you saw that and found it interesting, this is the long version of that. But the corollary of that is if you're finding me a little bit boring or you're too busy, there is a 5-minute version of the talk I'm about to give. So that exists there if you like. So I said this is a love story, and let's start by asking ourselves, how do love stories usually go? You might think it's something like non-binary person meets girl, girl meets boy, girl meets girl, but those are human love stories. Today we're talking about great data sets, so it's going to be learner meets data. And to tell our love story, there's some different ways you can do this. And one of my favorites and most entertaining is romantic comedies. And if you've ever seen a romantic comedy, but even if you haven't, they tend to kind of follow a little bit of a formula. And it often goes something like this. There's a meeting, or sometimes a meet cute, where our two protagonists meet each other in some interesting way. Sparks fly all of a sudden. They start getting along great, or there's some spark between them. There's some sort of tension or crisis that arises to kind of tear them asunder, or there's some sort of crisis in their relationship. But since this is a romantic comedy, we know that it ends up with both of them falling in love. So I thought that for data sets, this would be a great formula to tell my story as well. So the meeting starts in Toronto in a theater where I'm waiting. That's a picture of me on the left, waiting for the curtains to open on Hamilton, My brother had gotten my wife and I and him some tickets for Christmas. He's a really big Broadway fan, musical theater fan. And so, we're going through the playbill, the program, and I'm chatting with my brother, and he's saying that, oh, there's some really interesting stuff you can learn about Broadway. And one of them is weekly grosses, where you can learn about the ticket sales, the ticket prices, the percent of seats sold going like way, way back. And I later learned it went all the way back to 1985. So this is how I met the Broadway grosses data set. Sparks flew. When I got home, I went to playbill.com and looked it up to see just exactly what kind of information I could get. And I was pretty excited by what I found. This is an example of 1 week of grosses. So you can see we've got, the show, the potential gross, difference from last week, average and top ticket prices, number of seats sold, number of performances, the percent capacity of the theater. In some cases, it can be over 100%, standing room only, for tons and tons of different shows. And again, going all the way back to 1985. So I had all sorts of cool questions that I wanted to ask this data. Things like, are Hamilton tickets on Broadway really that expensive? And the answer is yes, they're $250 a pop US and $850 if you want like the premium best seats in the house. I also had questions like, what was popular the week I was born, which was in 1988? Phantom, Les Miserables, and Cats. So I'm lucky to have been born during a truly golden age of Broadway theater. But I had a whole bunch of other questions like, what's the highest grossing show ever? Or have average ticket prices gotten more expensive? Or is there any seasonality to ticket prices? Or do revivals perform as well as their originals? Or is Hamilton's success really unprecedented like it seems to be? But if you look at this table, you realize that you can't actually answer these questions. Which leads us to our crisis. I was stuck. I didn't want data, 1 week of data at a time. I wanted big data. I wanted the whole data set. I wanted to be able to analyze trends over time and figure out, aggregations for all these different shows. And the data was right there. I could see exactly where it was. I could go to different links to see different weeks, but I couldn't get to it. And I knew of a theoretical way that I could get the data, but I didn't know how to do it. So I asked myself, should I learn how to web scrape? And Alicia Silverstone's reaction on the right is kind of my initial reaction. I was thinking, oh man, that sounds so technical and complicated, and I have to futz around with HTML tags, and it just seems like so much trouble. But this is a love story, so we know that me as the learner, I persevered. So through a combination of David Robinson's screencasts, where he goes through different data sets and just kind of plays around with them. They're wonderful if you haven't checked them out. And the Arvis package by Hadley Wickham, I was able to put together a scraping script to get that whole big data set that I wanted to. And you can see a screenshot of that script on the right there. And it ended up with me falling in love. So I had a ton of fun analyzing this data set. I wrote a blog post about it, which you can see on the left. In the middle, you can see that it was featured on Tidy Tuesday about a year ago, April 2020. And for those who are familiar with it, Tidy Tuesday is a project where every week Thomas Mock from our studio posts a different data set, and people have fun just analyzing it, usually doing a data visualization, and if they want to, sharing it on Twitter and getting encouragement and feedback. And this also led to another screencast by David Robinson, whom I really admire, where he was going through this data, and as he was first exploring it, he said, "This is so cool," which was a really neat experience for me to have David Robinson say that about a data set that I put together. And if you're curious, this is one of the graphs that I put together, which looks at the top ticket prices for ticket prices for shows over time. And this let me answer one of my questions, which was, is Hamilton's success unprecedented? And it depends kind of what way you look at it, but my answer was no. The Producers was the Hamilton of its day. You can see that back in 2002, 2003, if you wanted to see the Producers and have the best seats in the house, you had to pay through the nose for it. So this is how I felt about this data. I'd had a wonderful experience analyzing it and working through how to web scrape and getting the answers to my questions and putting it out there in the world and having such a wonderful reaction to it. It was really a wonderful experience. And that's the end of the presentation, sorry. No, I'm kidding, of course. I originally said that this was a love story, but I kind of lied at the beginning there because it's really the story of many love stories. And I say that because there was an element of Groundhog Day to it, because the love story kept on repeating itself again and again. So I'm going to give a few examples. One of them is looking at Japanese mascots known as Yuruchara. You can see an example of one just on the right there, where every year in Japan, there's what's known as the Yuru Grand Prix, where they rank these Japanese mascots from all over the country. So I thought this was really interesting. So I wanted to put a data set together that looked at the results of this Grand Prix, which involved more web scraping. And I even learned how to use the Google Language API using the Google Language R package to translate the website from Japanese into English because it was only available in Japanese. Another data set involved so if someone visits the president or the vice president of the United States, they often exchange gifts. And because of the laws in the United States, those have to be very fastidiously recorded, and there are descriptions of them and things like that. So I thought this seemed like an interesting data set. So I wanted to do some text mining of the descriptions of all the different gifts from different countries that gifted things to either the president or the vice president or any federal employee of the United States. So I was able to find things like Iceland often gifts a book set called The Complete Sagas of Icelanders, or Sweden often gifts for crystal, or Ghana gifts kente, which is a traditional fabric, and that Cuba naturally gifts cigars. And this love story involves me parsing dirty PDF data, learning how to do annotations and text formatting with the ggtext package, and also doing some basic natural language processing using TF-IDF, getting the graph that you see here. A third love story, and this is the one that was in my lightning talk, was looking at fictional character personalities. So if you look at TV shows like Star Trek or The Office, or books like Pride and Prejudice, there was a big effort to, through an online quiz, to have people kind of rank what the personalities of a whole bunch of different characters are. So it's a little bit small, but you can see, for instance, in Pride and Prejudice, George Wickham is selfish, traitorous, and scandalous. Jane Bennet is kind, feminine, and loyal. So I used this data set to put together what I think is quite a beautiful graph there on the left, and then also do some principal component analysis where I could kind of look at the differences between characters, and you can see an example of that on the right. So through this love story, I did more text formatting with ggtext. I created some beautiful graphs that I thought would be worthy of the subject matter with ggplot2. Again, I learned how to do principal component analysis using the tidy models framework, which was a new thing for me. And I wrote a blog post about this particular data set too, where the graph on the scatter plot on the right is an interactive scatter plot. So you can mouse over it, it'll give you some information, some tooltips. So I learned how to use Plotly as well. The final love story, I know you're probably getting sick of these after watch a bunch of rom-coms. Sometimes you're up for something different, but the final love story is one that involves the timing of when cherry blossoms bloom in Japan. And it resulted in the animation that you're seeing here. And through this love story, I really dove deep into GG Animate, so much GG Animate. But I was really able to, I feel, get a good sense of at least the basics of that particular package, which was really rewarding. Text formatting with GG Text, again, it's just one of those really go-to packages. I learned how to add custom icons using the GG image package. So if you see those little sakura blossoms that pop up, those are like a custom icon that I got online. And then installing and using custom fonts. So the font that you're seeing there was a custom one that I had to find and then figure out how to get it put into the animation. So those are the love stories. And really, when I think about it, when I think about these great data sets and the love stories that they're able to tell, I think that there is one big benefit and two small benefits of great data sets. The big benefit is that great data sets provide a wonderful learning path. I'm going to paraphrase the quote that Rohan talked about just at the beginning of this talk. It's that something like passion or enthusiasm is a way to get you to do hard work. And this is really the case here. If you think about kind of a typical learning path or one that I came across and the mentality that I had when I first started learning R, which was kind of in my mid-20s, it kind of went something like, I want to learn regression. So I decided what I wanted to learn. I then found a data set where I could apply that learning or practice that technique on. So an example of this might be Titanic passengers. And then I would try to achieve the outcome that I had decided on in step one. So we've got logistic regression on the right there. But what great data sets do is they kind of flip that process. So rather than starting with the outcome that you want, you start with a data set that piques your curiosity. And for me, this was Broadway grosses. You then let your curiosity be your guide. So you ask yourself, what questions do I have for this data? What do I want to learn about it? And then in answering those questions, you kind of learn something as a bit of a byproduct. So for the Broadway grosses data set, I could have taken that in a whole bunch of different directions. I could have learned web scraping, which is something that I did. Time series analysis, because you're looking at things that are going over time. Forecasting, because that kind of fits in with time series analysis, and there's an element of seasonality and like holidays that you might want to capture. Natural language processing, or NLP, because the data set also includes the synopses of each of the different shows. So you might see whether there's something in there that you could find that might be interesting, or even looking at causal inference. I saw a Twitter post a few weeks ago that looked at using this data set that looked at whether it seemed like being nominated or winning a Tony Award seemed to have an impact on ticket sales. So there's a whole bunch of different directions that you can take this. But the important thing is that you're interested in the data set to kind of push you through. So the focus really is on this, the curiosity of and having that curiosity, push you forward and have you answer questions rather than learning something. And I know there's a lot of educators in the audience here, and you're probably rolling your eyes because you're saying this is really basic stuff. This is outcome-based learning versus inquiry-based learning. So outcome-based learning is where you identify what you want to learn. It's that first mentality that I had. You identify what you want to learn, and then you kind of follow the steps to get there. Whereas inquiry-based learning is really about having your internal curiosity be an intrinsic motivation to learn something. And in my opinion, I think that that's a more engaging, more fun way to learn. It's not perfect, because there are some circumstances, like if you're taking a class on something, or say you're at work and you need to learn how to do a specific thing, where it doesn't make sense. But all this stuff is side projects and things I do in my spare time. So having that element of fun where I'm satiating my curiosity is something that really, really works well for me. And I think if someone is trying to learn R or statistics or data science or machine learning or really anything in kind of a broad way where they don't have specific things that they need to do, this is a really great approach. And great data sets are a really fantastic way to kind of add fuel to the fire to feed that approach. So that to me is really the kind of the big benefit of great data sets. But I mentioned that there are two small benefits too, and I just want to go through those briefly. Great data sets are also a way of sharing who you are. So just me talking about Broadway grosses or cherry blossoms or Japanese mascots, you probably have at least a little bit of a sense of who I am and what my interests are. But that's true of anyone with the data sets they share. And there are three examples here. Amit Levinson, who's been involved in the RStats community for a little while. He wrote a blog post about the distance to the Golda ice cream locations in Israel, which I guess is like a Baskin Robbins or something, or a Marble Slab, I'm not sure. Jessie Mostapak, she got really excited about a data set about lemurs, where you track what they eat and how much they weigh and who they give birth to and what in different species and things like that. And then on the right we have I'm not sure the person's name, but they go by part-time analyst. They have just a whole bunch of articles about Formula One seasons and analyzing the drivers and the races and things like that. And I really love seeing this stuff, because if I met any of these people at a conference or on the street, or I was engaging with them on Twitter or another social media platform, I feel like, just by them sharing these things, these interesting data sets, what to them are great data sets, I have something that I can talk to them about. I can have a point where I say, oh, tell me about the ice cream stuff, or tell me about the lemurs, or tell me more about Formula One. There's a way that we can connect with other people through sharing great data sets. Which leads me to the second big benefit that I want to talk about, the second small benefit that I want to talk about. And that is that great data sets are community builders. So what do I mean by this? I think the big thing here is, if you're interested in a data set, I can guarantee that someone else out there is also interested in it. And by sharing that with the community, you're really enriching the community, because I think that having more data sets available, and especially more data sets that reflect different points of view and people that come from different backgrounds, they really make our community stronger as a whole. And they can also, kind of underline a shift away from some more problematic data sets. And a good example of this is the IRIS data set, which is pretty famous kind of go-to data set. It was put together by someone who was a big supporter of eugenics, which is obviously not something that people in the community want to be supportive of. So there were, about a year ago, I think there was an effort to have an alternative to IRIS, and the result was the Palmer Penguins data set. And there's some really great work done with some really wonderful artwork with these really cute penguins. And it was just a really exciting data set to dig into, and something that to me was not only more interesting than the petal length of irises, but it was also something that I think reflected the values of the community better than the IRIS data set as well. And then finally, I think that curating and sharing data sets is a great way and a great excuse for a learner as an individual to engage with the community. So if we go back to these posts where people were kind of sharing who they are by looking at specific data sets, that's a great way to kind of strike up a conversation with people, get people to share your work or say, oh, this is really cool, I didn't know about this. This GIF on the right is basically how I feel when someone likes a tweet about a data set or I shared or a blog post that I wrote. And I think I'm actually talking to you here today because of the data sets that I shared. I think the connection I had with Rohan was that he found out about the Broadway Grosses data set, I guess through his network, and reached out to me over Twitter to invite me to speak. So it's a really great way to not only get to know people in the community better, but just get involved and do things like talk to wonderful data folks like yourself. So if you're saying, okay, Alex, I'm convinced, you got me, how do I start? I have a few specific tips, but because it's something that is really born out of your own curiosity and it's something that comes from your own intrinsic motivation to learn, I can't give you like a hard and fast step-by-step guide, but I can at least give you some tips to get going. First, I would start with exploring some of the existing data sets that are already out there, because I can almost guarantee you'll find something that really speaks to you where you just start asking it questions that you want to know the answers to. And some areas you can look are Tidy Tuesday. I think there's a back catalog of maybe 2 or 3.5 years now. So that would probably be maybe 150 or probably about 150 data sets. Kaggle has a lot of public data sets, which are really wonderful, and you can search specific things there as well. And then if you are interested in any of the data sets that I mentioned here today, I've compiled them along with some others in a data repository on my GitHub. And it's all available either in CSVs or text file, tab separated files. So they're easy to get going with. And if you're really, really struggling with getting going, usually movies or TV shows or sports data sets, people I find tend to be a little bit more engaged with those. So there might be something there that you can start with. The second thing is don't force it. I know when I was, learning a little bit more full time, I would put a lot of pressure on myself to either find a data set or learn something new. And if I didn't do it, if a week or a couple weeks went by and I wasn't really making any progress, I would be really, really hard on myself. But that's not the right tack to take, just because you can't force your interests. You kind of have to know what your interests are and just be open to data sets finding you. So what I mean by that is if you kind of have an understanding of your interests and you're having a conversation with someone or you're reading an article or you're just scrolling through Twitter or Instagram or something like that and something kind of piques your curiosity that's a little bit data oriented, pull on that thread and follow it to see if there's something there where maybe there's a data set that you can uncover. So that's what I mean by don't force it. The third is that if you want to go beyond looking at the existing data sets, stuff that's already out there, and actually putting together your own data sets, know that it's very likely that it will involve web scraping in some form or another. There's a lot of really great resources on web scraping. I don't consider myself an overly technical person, but between the really easy to use Arvis package, if you use R, and some of the things like David Robinson's screencasts, where he has walkthroughs of doing web scraping. You can do it so long as it's not super complicated. You don't have to go through a login screen or something like that. But if you are interested in curating your own data sets, you'll probably have to do at least a little bit of this. And then the last thing, and I know I've said this before, but I think it bears repeating, is to share with the community at large. Encouragement from others is a fantastic motivator. I know I've posted things on Twitter where people have said, oh, that's so cool, and it's made my week, and it's kind of kept me going. And beyond that, it's, as I said, it builds the community. And if you find something interesting, someone else does too. And you could come across a situation where you share a data set and then 6 months or a year and a half later, someone sends you a message on Twitter or LinkedIn or something like that saying, oh, I came across this data set or this blog post or something that you put out there into the world, and I found it really interesting, or I found it really helpful for this reason. And they might even say, hey, do you want to get together for a coffee or something like that? It's a really fantastic way to build connections and, as I said, enrich the community at large. So that brings us to the end of the love story. I hope that you enjoyed it, and yeah, I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts and fielding any questions that you have.
Thanks, mate. That was awesome. So impressed by everything to do with the presentation, and Liza points out that it ended a much better way than Romeo and Juliet's love story did as well.
Yeah, I guess not all love stories end with the falling in love. There's some dicey ones too.
Quite right. I'll stop recording.